The autumn breeze followed Sarah Chen Williams through the heavy glass doors of Blank and Rue, carrying with it the scent of rain-washed Seattle streets and the promise of an exceptional birthday lunch. At 45, Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had fought her way to success, earning every step of her journey from a small-town girl to one of Seattle's most respected corporate lawyers. Her Hermes scarf, a gift from her son James last Christmas, draped perfectly over her charcoal Valentino suit, an ensemble she had chosen carefully for both the restaurant's upscale atmosphere and the meaning it held. The scarf's deep burgundy matched the shade of wine she and James had shared the night he first dreamed of owning his own restaurant, 5 years ago in their small apartment kitchen. The interior of Blank and Rue embraced her with warmth, its crystal chandeliers casting prismatic patterns across the cream-colored walls. The soft jazz notes of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue floated through the air, mixing with the gentle clink of fine china and the murmur of lunchtime conversations. Sarah smiled, remembering how James had insisted on personally selecting every detail, from the hand-carved oak bar to the locally sourced art adorning the walls. It was 1:15 p.m., and the restaurant hummed with its usual afternoon energy. Business executives in sharp suits occupied corner tables, their laptops discreetly tucked beside elaborate place settings. A group of ladies who lunched chattered over their salads, their laughter mixing with the restaurant's ambient soundtrack. Near the window, a young couple shared intimate glances over what appeared to be an anniversary celebration. Sarah had deliberately chosen this time for her surprise visit, peak lunch hour when James would be too busy in the kitchen to check his phone. Her friends Catherine and Michael would be arriving in 15 minutes, all part of an elaborate plan to celebrate not just her birthday, but also the restaurant's recent recognition in Seattle Metropolitan Magazine as one of the city's top new dining establishments. As she stood near the entrance, Sarah's practiced eye caught the subtle ballet of service unfolding before her. Servers glided between tables with practiced grace, sommeliers offered expert wine suggestions, and the maitre d' orchestrated it all with subtle hand gestures and quiet words. This was the dream James had described countless times over their Sunday dinners, and seeing it realized filled her heart with maternal pride. The hostess station, however, stood conspicuously empty. Sarah glanced at her watch, a vintage Cartier tank, her first splurge after winning a major case, and settled into one of the plush waiting area chairs. She pulled out her phone to check a message from Catherine, confirming their arrival time, while absently noting the growing number of guests being seated around her. The scents wafting from the kitchen made her smile. The subtle hint of truffle, the rich aroma of reduced wine sauces, the sweet notes of fresh-baked bread. Each fragrance told the story of her son's passion, his dedication to creating not just a restaurant, but an experience. What made it even more special was that none of the staff, except for the head chef, knew she was James's mother. She and James had agreed to keep their relationship private, allowing him to earn respect on his own merit rather than through family connections. Little did Sarah know that this ordinary autumn afternoon was about to become anything but ordinary, as her simple birthday lunch was destined to transform into a powerful lesson in humanity that would change multiple lives forever. Monica Palmer's reflection in the polished silver coffee pot caught her attention as she emerged from the service area. She quickly adjusted her crisp white apron and smoothed back a stray blonde hair that had escaped her perfectly arranged chignon. After 3 years as senior server at Blank and Rue, she had cultivated an image of polished sophistication that she guarded zealously. Through the kitchen's swing doors, she could hear the rhythmic chopping of vegetables and Chef Antoine's passionate instructions in his thick French accent. The lunch service was in full swing, and Monica had already calculated that her section's tables would bring in substantial tips from the business crowd. She had specifically requested, and been granted, the prime section near the windows, where Seattle's elite typically preferred to sit. When Sarah Chen Williams entered, Monica was arranging crystal stemware at her prized corner table, preparing it for a group of regular customers, banking executives who always ordered expensive wines. She paused, water pitcher suspended mid-pour, as her gaze swept over Sarah's impeccable attire. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Monica's eyes, a mixture of surprise and something darker. Thomas Chen, no relation to Sarah, the newly hired host, immediately noticed the elegant woman waiting to be seated. At 23, he was still learning the intricacies of fine dining service, but his instincts told him this guest deserved immediate attention. As he stepped forward to greet Sarah, Monica's sharp voice cut through the air. "Thomas, remember that corner table is reserved for Mr. Harrison's party," Monica called out, her tone carrying the authority of seniority. "And the window section is fully committed for the lunch service." She smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. Thomas hesitated, his tablet showing several open tables in the system. He glanced at Monica, then back at Sarah, his conscience wrestling with his need to keep his new job. "I'll check the availability," he stammered, fingers nervously tapping the tablet screen. Meanwhile, Monica swooped gracefully past Sarah, greeting a middle-aged couple who had just arrived. "Mr. and Mrs. Davidson, how lovely to see you again. Your usual table is ready." She guided them to a prime window seat, one she had just claimed was reserved. Sarah observed this dance of service with the keen eye of a lawyer who had built her career on noticing details. She watched as Monica seated 3 more parties who had arrived after her, each time offering a different excuse why certain sections were reserved or, unfortunately, unavailable. The registration book lay open at the host station, its pages clearly showing several unreserved tables. A young server named Lily watched the scene unfold from the service station, her hand shaking slightly as she arranged silverware. She had witnessed similar situations before, but had felt powerless to intervene against Monica's authority. Today, however, something felt different. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity in Sarah's demeanor, or perhaps it was simply the accumulation of too many similar incidents. The tension in the entrance area grew palpable. Other diners began to notice the situation, their conversations dropping to whispers. An elderly gentleman in a corner booth frowned over his reading glasses, while a young couple exchanged uncomfortable glances over their appetizers. Unknown to everyone, Chef Antoine had just sent a message to James about a special wine pairing, inadvertently setting in motion a chain of events that would transform the afternoon and Blanc and Rue forever. After 20 minutes of watching Monica's elaborate dance of deception, Sarah Chen Williams straightened her Valentino suit jacket and approached the host station with measured steps. Her heels clicked softly against the hardwood floor, each step carrying the confidence of someone who had faced boardroom battles and courthouse dramas with unwavering poise. "Excuse me," Sarah addressed Thomas directly, her voice carrying just enough authority to command attention without aggression. "I've been waiting for quite some time, and I couldn't help but notice several parties being seated ahead of me. Could you please explain the seating policy?" Thomas's tablet trembled slightly in his hands. "Well," he began, but Monica materialized beside him, smoothly taking control of the situation. "As I mentioned earlier," Monica interjected, her practiced smile firmly in place, "we have very specific seating arrangements during our lunch service, and of course, we have certain standards to maintain." Her eyes lingered pointedly on Sarah's designer outfit, somehow managing to look past its obvious quality. Sarah raised one elegantly arched eyebrow. "Standards," she repeated, the single word carrying the weight of years of similar encounters. "I'd be very interested in hearing about these standards. Perhaps we could discuss them with the manager." The young couple who had been seated earlier, Amanda and David Torres, exchanged glances. Amanda discreetly pulled out her phone, keeping it partially hidden behind a menu as she began recording. Her own experiences as a woman of color in corporate America had taught her the importance of documenting such moments. Monica's smile tightened fractionally. "Our manager is currently occupied with important business matters. However, I can assure you that our policies are quite firm. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the bistro down the street." She gestured vaguely toward the door, her voice dripping with false concern. At a nearby table, Mr. Gerald Franklin, a retired judge who had presided over numerous discrimination cases, set down his fork with a deliberate clink. He had seen enough. "Young lady," he called out to Monica, "I've been coming to this establishment since it opened, and I've never heard of these policies you're referring to." The restaurant's ambient noise had dropped to a hushed murmur. Lily, the young server, had disappeared into the kitchen, her conscience finally overwhelming her fear of Monica's authority. In the bar area, the bartender, Miguel, was already texting James, knowing this situation needed immediate attention. Sarah remained perfectly composed, her legal training evident in her measured response. "I see several empty tables in what appears to be your main dining section. I'd appreciate if you could explain, specifically, why those tables are unavailable." She gestured to 3 clearly empty tables, each fully set for service. Monica's facade began to crack slightly. "Those tables, they're being held for. There are pending reservations." She fumbled with her tablet, desperately searching for excuses that were becoming increasingly transparent. The maitre d', Pierre, who had been occupied with a wine delivery, emerged from the cellar and immediately sensed the tension. He started moving toward the entrance, but before he could intervene, a voice called out from the kitchen doorway, "Mom." The single word cut through the tension like a knife, and Monica's tablet slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor in the now silent restaurant. Behind them, James Williams, owner and executive chef of Blanc and Roux, stood in his crisp white chef's coat, his expression shifting from joy to concern as he took in the scene before him. The silence that followed James's entrance was deafening. Even the usual kitchen clatter seemed to pause, as if the very building was holding its breath. James Williams, in his pristine chef's whites with executive chef and owner embroidered in elegant script, stood framed in the kitchen doorway, his 6-foot frame casting a long shadow across the hardwood floor. "Mom, I thought you weren't coming until next week for the new menu tasting," James said, walking toward Sarah with a warm smile that quickly faded as he registered the tension in the room. His dark eyes, so much like his mother's, swept across the scene. The dropped tablet at Monica's feet, his mother's composed but rigid posture, and the uncomfortable expressions of the other diners. Monica's face had transformed into a masterpiece of dawning realization. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her complexion nearly as white as her apron. Her perfectly manicured hands began to tremble as the full weight of her actions crashed down upon her. "Owner," she whispered, the word barely audible. Sarah's expression softened as she looked at her son. "Surprise," she said quietly. "I thought I'd drop in for my birthday lunch. Your maitre d' was just explaining some fascinating policies about your seating arrangements." The subtle emphasis on policies made several diners shift uncomfortably in their seats. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. As a black chef who had worked his way up through some of the finest kitchens in Europe and America, he was no stranger to prejudice. But to have it directed at his mother, in his own restaurant, brought a different kind of ache. "Pierre," James called to the maitre d', who had been frozen in place since the revelation, "please ensure my mother's regular table is prepared." The one by the window that Monica said was reserved. His voice carried no anger, only a quiet authority that seemed to fill the entire room. Mr. Franklin, the retired judge, stood up from his table. "Chef Williams," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his years on the bench, "your mother has handled this situation with remarkable grace. You should be proud." "I've always been proud of her, sir," James replied, never taking his eyes off Monica, who seemed to be trying to make herself as small as possible. "She taught me everything I know about dignity under pressure, and about second chances." At these words, Monica's head snapped up, hope flickering briefly across her features. Thomas, the young host, had finally found his voice. "Chef, I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry." His hands were still shaking as he clutched his tablet. "It's all right, Thomas," Sarah interjected kindly. "Sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to speak up." She turned to her son, touching his arm gently. "James, I believe you and your senior server need to have a conversation. I can wait." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Monica, please join me in my office." He turned to Pierre. "Please ensure my mother receives our full attention, and inform Catherine and Michael they'll be joining the owner's mother when they arrive." As Monica followed James toward his office, her steps unsteady, the restaurant slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, though now centered on what they had just witnessed. The young couple who had been recording discreetly put away their phones, exchanging knowing looks. This was a moment that would resonate far beyond the walls of Blank and Rue. James's office contrasted sharply with the formal dining room outside. Personal touches softened the professional space. A framed photo of him and Sarah at his culinary school graduation, his first chef's knife mounted on the wall, and a well-worn cookbook collection that spoke of years of dedication to his craft. Monica perched on the edge of a leather chair, her usually perfect posture now crumpled under the weight of her actions. Her hands twisted the corner of her apron. A nervous habit she thought she'd abandoned years ago. James settled behind his desk, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. 3 years, he began quietly. "You've been with us since we opened. You helped build this restaurant's reputation for excellence." He picked up a recent review that praised the service standards Monica had helped establish. "Chef I." Monica's voice cracked. "I never knew she was your mother. I didn't mean to." "Stop," James interrupted, his voice firm, but not unkind. "Think carefully about what you're saying. Would it have been acceptable if she wasn't my mother?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Monica's mouth opened, then closed, as tears began to form in her eyes. "Let me tell you a story," James continued, standing to look out his office window. "When I was training in Paris, a 3-star restaurant rejected my application without even looking at my credentials. The head chef later admitted it was because of a photo included in my portfolio." He turned back to face Monica. "Do you know what my mother said when I told her?" Monica shook her head silently. She said, "Then it's their loss, and someone else's gain." The next day, I applied to their biggest competitor. 2 years later, I was running their pastry section. James sat on the edge of his desk. "My mother taught me that the best revenge against prejudice is excellence." Tears were now flowing freely down Monica's cheeks, smudging her carefully applied makeup. "I don't know why I've never thought of myself as..." She struggled to find the words. "As someone who would discriminate," James finished gently. "Most people don't, but our actions speak louder than our self-image." He pulled out a folder from his desk. "This isn't the first incident, Monica. Other staff members have reported similar patterns." Monica's face crumpled as the reality of her behavior over the years crashed down around her. "Are you firing me?" she whispered. James studied her for a long moment. "My mother believes in second chances. So do I, but real change requires more than just saying sorry." He opened the folder. "I have a proposition for you." He laid out several documents on the desk. "These are enrollment forms for our new management training program, along with registration for intensive workshops on inclusive service practices. The cash. You'll be working every position in the restaurant, from dishwasher to host, alongside every member of our diverse staff." Monica looked up, confusion mixing with hope in her tear-stained face. "Consider it a reset," James explained. "If you're willing to put in the work, to truly understand every person who makes this restaurant successful, you'll have a chance to earn back not just your position, but our trust." Outside the office, the lunch service continued, but inside, a transformation was beginning. As Monica reached for the papers with trembling hands, both she and James understood that this was more than just a moment of accountability. It was an opportunity for genuine change. The morning sun streamed through Blank and Rue's windows as Monica arrived at 6 a.m., trading her usual perfectly pressed server's uniform for kitchen whites. Her first day of training would begin in the heart of the restaurant, the kitchen. Chef Antoine, a stern-faced man from Lyon, with 3 decades of culinary experience, waited for her at the prep station. "Today, you learn the foundation," he said, his French accent thick but clear. "Everything we serve begins here." He gestured to a mountain of vegetables waiting to be prepped. Monica stared at the pile, her manicured nails suddenly feeling very impractical. At the next station, Rosa Martinez, the morning prep cook, glanced over with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She'd worked alongside Monica for 3 years, but they'd never exchanged more than cursory greetings. Now, as Monica struggled with her first attempt at properly dicing an onion, Rosa stepped in. "Like this," Rosa demonstrated, her knife moving with practiced precision. "My grandmother taught me this technique when I was 7. She ran a small restaurant in Mexico City for 40 years. Her voice carried pride as she shared her story for the first time with Monica. Throughout the morning, Monica's hands grew sore, and her feet ached in the unfamiliar kitchen clogs. Yet something was shifting inside her as she worked alongside people she'd barely acknowledged before. She learned that Rosa had put 2 children through college working morning prep shifts. She discovered that Antoine, despite his gruff exterior, spent Sunday afternoons teaching cooking to underprivileged youth. During the lunch break, instead of eating separately in the dining room as she usually did, Monica found herself sharing a family meal with the kitchen staff. George, the dishwasher, had brought his wife's homemade tamales. As they ate, he spoke about his dreams of opening a food truck, his eyes lighting up as he described his business plan. "You know," he said, passing Monica another tamal, "I've been saving every extra penny. 2 more years, maybe less." His determination reminded her of stories she'd heard about James's early days, working multiple jobs to save for his restaurant. The afternoon brought new challenges as the dinner prep began. Sarah Chen Williams made a surprise appearance in the kitchen, not as an owner's mother, but as a helper. She rolled up the sleeves of her designer blouse and joined Monica at the prep station. "My mother was a waitress," Sarah shared as they worked side by side. "She taught me that every role in a restaurant is essential." James learned that lesson early too. She smiled warmly at Monica's surprised expression. By day's end, Monica's perfectly styled hair had fallen flat, her hands smelled of garlic, and her feet were screaming. But as she sat in the empty dining room after closing, something felt different. The restaurant she thought she knew so well had revealed entirely new dimensions. James found her there, staring thoughtfully at the space she'd worked in for years, yet never truly seen. "First day insights?" he asked, sitting across from her. "I never knew their stories," Monica replied softly. "All this time, I've been so focused on maintaining what I thought was excellence that I missed the actual excellence right in front of me." She looked down at her hands, now bearing small nicks from her kitchen training. "Thank you for this chance." James nodded, understanding that this was just the beginning. "Tomorrow you'll work with Miguel at the bar. He's been practicing mixology for 15 years. Started as a barback in Singapore." He stood up to leave, then paused. "Every person here has a story, Monica, including you. The question is, what story do you want to tell from now on?" 3 months into her training program, Monica stood before the staff meeting in Blanc and Rue's private dining room, her hands steady as she distributed handouts to her colleagues. Gone was the perfectly coiffed server who once lorded over the dining room. In her place stood someone new, someone who had learned to see beyond the surface. "These are the revised service guidelines we've developed together," she began, her voice carrying a warmth that would have been unthinkable 12 weeks ago. "Every suggestion here comes from our shared experiences across all departments." The room was packed with staff from every corner of the restaurant. George, now a shift leader in dish service, sat next to Antoine, who had finally cracked a smile after Monica mastered his mother's ratatouille recipe. Rosa beamed from her seat. She'd recently been promoted to sous chef for the breakfast service, a position Monica had helped her apply for. "But before we discuss the guidelines," Monica continued, "I want to share something personal." She took a deep breath. "When I first started here, I thought excellence meant perfection. Perfect appearance, perfect service, perfect everything. I thought I knew what that looked like." She glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. What I've learned over these past months is that true excellence comes from something deeper. It's in Rosa's knife skills, passed down through generations. It's in Miguel's ability to remember not just drink orders, but the stories behind why customers choose them. It's in Thomas's natural talent for making every guest feel special. The young host blushed at the mention of his name. He'd grown more confident since that pivotal day, now training new staff members himself. Monica moved to the center of the room, her posture relaxed but professional. Last week, a guest asked me what makes Blank and Roof special. For the first time, I gave an honest answer. It's not our chandelier or our wine list. It's the heart of this place. It's all of you. James watched from the doorway as Monica led the team through the new guidelines. Each point had been carefully crafted to ensure every guest felt welcomed, respected, and valued. The registration process had been updated, the seating policy clarified, and most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination had been prominently featured. Sarah had joined the meeting quietly, slipping into a seat at the back. She watched as Monica handled questions with patience and insight, demonstrating how each guideline had emerged from real experiences during her training. And finally, Monica said, reaching the last page, "We're introducing monthly cultural exchange dinners. Each month, a different team member will have the opportunity to showcase their heritage through a special menu. Rosa and her family have agreed to host our first event." The excitement in the room was palpable. Antoine immediately began discussing potential fusion dishes with Rosa, while George offered to contribute his wife's secret mole recipe. After the meeting, Sarah approached Monica. "I heard about what you did last week," she said softly. Monica looked puzzled. "The young woman who came in looking for her first job," Sarah clarified. "Thomas told me how you spent your break helping her prepare for the interview, even lending her your spare blazer." Monica smiled, remembering the nervousness in the girl's eyes that had once mirrored her own. "Everyone deserves a chance to shine," she replied. "Someone taught me that recently." As the staff dispersed, returning to their stations for the evening service, James watched Monica gather her materials. The transformation wasn't just in her actions or words, it was in her eyes. They now saw people, not positions, potential, not prejudice. 6 months to the day after the incident that changed everything, Blank and Rue buzzed with unusual energy. The tables had been rearranged to create an intimate space for a special evening, the restaurant's first annual Community Unity Dinner. Sarah Chin Williams arrived early, pausing in the entrance to admire the transformation. Strings of warm lights draped the ceiling, and each table featured centerpieces representing different cultural celebrations. The air was rich with the aromas of dishes from around the world, each one telling a story of heritage and heart. Monica greeted her at the door, confidence and humility now perfectly balanced in her bearing. "Mrs. Chen Williams, welcome," she smiled warmly. "Your table is ready, but first, would you mind if I showed you something?" She led Sarah to a newly installed wall near the entrance. Framed photographs showed the restaurant's staff in action, Rosa teaching a cooking class to local youth, George proudly standing before his newly launched weekend food truck, Thomas mentoring new hosts. At the center was a simple mission statement. "At Blank and Rue, excellence is measured by how we lift each other up." This was James's idea, Monica explained, but the words came from all of us. The evening unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Guests from all walks of life filled the tables. Regular customers, local community leaders, and families of staff members. James had insisted that every employee who wished to attend could bring their loved ones. During the main course, James stood to address the room. "A restaurant is more than its menu or its reputation," he began. "It's a place where stories intersect, where barriers break down over shared meals, and where we learn that the finest ingredients in life are the connections we make." He gestured to his mother, who beamed with pride. "My mother taught me that true leadership isn't about maintaining standards. It's about raising them, not just in how we serve our food, but in how we serve our community." Monica then took the floor, her voice steady. 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about fine dining. Today, I know that true refinement isn't about exclusion. It's about expansion. It's about making room at the table for everyone's story. She shared how the restaurant had partnered with local organizations to provide culinary training for underprivileged youth, how their new hiring practices had created opportunities for talented individuals from all backgrounds, and how their monthly cultural celebration dinners had become the most sought-after reservations in the city. The evening's dessert was special, a fusion creation combining Sarah's favorite Chinese egg custard tart with classic French pastry techniques. As servers presented the delicate pastries, Monica personally served Sarah's table. "This is more than dessert," Monica said softly. "It's a reminder that the sweetest moments in life often come from unexpected combinations." As the evening drew to a close, James watched from the kitchen doorway as Monica expertly managed the dining room. She knew every guest's name, their preferences, their stories. More importantly, she had learned to see the humanity in each person who walked through the door. Sarah joined her son, slipping her arm through his. "You know," she mused, "sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes." James nodded, watching as Monica helped an elderly couple with their coats. Genuine warmth in her interaction. "She's not the same person she was 6 months ago," he observed. "None of us are," Sarah replied wisely. "That's the beauty of growth. It changes everyone it touches." As the last guests departed, the staff gathered for their traditional end-of-service meeting. Looking around the circle of faces, now friends rather than just colleagues, Monica realized that what had begun as her journey of redemption had become something far more powerful, a transformation of an entire community, one table at a time.